Hi, today I'd like to begin my discussion on my discovery of spirituality and stepping onto the path of knowledge. Some of this information will be familiar to some people who've seen my previous videos, but I feel it's important to repeat this because it is relevant to where I think these videos are headed. Um, Continuing from my last video, once I had walked away from organized religion, um, thoughts of it were not in my mind for years. They were completely forgotten. At the age of 19, I joined the Army in order to avoid being drafted and be sent to Vietnam. And I ended up instead being sent to Korea. I wanted to be far from my family, and 10,000 miles seemed to be a good distance. I arrived in Korea in December of 1972, and I immediately fell into the rampant drug culture that existed at the time. Towards the end of 1973, I was seriously into Reds, Seconal, Secobarbital. I don't even know if they make these anymore. They were so potent. Um, but I had gone to see my mama-san the night before Halloween to get some Reds, and she only had 3 available, which she gave me in exchange for some Ivory soap and some American cigarettes. And she told me there were more on the way, but they were not here yet. But she assured me that they were A number 1, which generally means, these are very, very good. So I pocketed them. I went to work the next day, Halloween, at the brigade headquarters where I worked for the colonel. I was a personnel clerk, and we worked a 9 to 5 job. And when work was over, I swallowed the 3 Reds and talked to a few people and intended to walk to my Quonset hut to change into my civilian clothes and go into one of the local villages and party, which is what you did. And normally I took anywhere from 4 to 6 of these things at a time, having a high tolerance after so many months. But these 3 were apparently uncut. I never made it to my Quonset hut. I was found face down in the dirt, unconscious, and I remember waking up at one point in a helicopter, being medevaced or being taken to Seoul, where the main hospital was, and then I remember blackness. My next memory goes into an area that I find very hard to discuss because there are not adequate words to describe what I want to say. Um, for lack of a better use of terminology, I experienced pure awareness. There was consciousness, but it was not the consciousness that I knew as my ego or myself. I had no physical body, but I had the knowledge that I was. This was an incredibly peaceful experience, very serene, nothing negative whatsoever, and I could have stayed there forever. But I became aware somehow of what seemed to be a light in the distance, if I can call it a distance. It attracted me, and I put my awareness on it, and I seemed to be moving towards it. But at the same time, I also became aware of what seemed to be what I call a tapping, a regular sequence of beats. Um, I sensed them. I was aware of them, but I did not know where they were coming from. Um, but they distracted me from my attention on the light. And as I focused my awareness on this tapping, it became more intense, and it eventually seemed to surround me, and it became more intense to the point that I felt what I could call pain, but I can't define where that pain was. There was an uncomfortable feeling. It eventually became so intense that it turned into extreme pain, and I suddenly opened my eyes to find an army medic pounding on my chest. Um, I, I vividly recall throwing my arm out and tossing this medic probably halfway across the helicopter. I was so pissed off that I was no longer in this place that I had been. I did not want to leave there, and I was brought back, and suddenly I was in a helicopter. I spent Halloween night, 1973, in a detox ward with one other person. I was kept there for over a week. I was interviewed by psychiatrists, psychologists, all trying to determine if I had attempted suicide, which I had not. And eventually I was released back to my camp, where I was immediately stripped of my secret clearance, and my job duties were changed from working for the colonel to becoming the company clerk for my company, the Radar O'Reilly type of position. I was charged with an Article 15, which is basically one step below a court-martial. I was read charges. My colonel, previous colonel that I worked for, presided over this hearing. I was demoted. I was fined a couple $100, which was some good money at that time. Some other things, and at the end of it all, he suspended all of my fines and demotions and all of that. I guess it helps to have friends in high places. A little while afterwards, I was walking through camp, and I went to the camp library, and I came across a book, by chance possibly, or perhaps I was meant to read it. It was by Alan Watts, who I had never heard of before, and it was called The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. Alan Watts became my first teacher on the path. I devoured that book that night in one reading, and I read it again. And I will talk about it in my next video. This is the book. The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are by Alan Watts. I would highly recommend it as good reading for anyone interested. We'll get into that in part 2 of this video.